freedom in which God has given us. Let us live free. Let us stand firm. You see, as we are called to live free and stand firm, lastly, we're called not to get yoked again. Don't get yoked again. You see here, Paul, I believe, gets to the heart of our freedom. Paul uses this interesting word, yoke. The concise Oxford English Dictionary defines yoke as a wooden crosspiece that is fastened over the necks of two animals, such as oxen, attached to a plow or a cart. It was loaded down with obligations for pulling and labor. You see, Paul uses this word to illustrate how the law is a yoke. The crushing weight of this yoke is the obligation to obey the whole law. In Acts 15, at the Jerusalem Council, Peter made reference to the law as being a yoke. He says, "Why do you try to test God by putting on the necks of the Gentile disciples a yoke that neither we nor our fathers have been able to bear?" Now, allow me to expound a little on the Mosaic law in which Peter and Paul were speaking of. See, I believe there are three usages of the Mosaic law presented in Galatians. Number one, it is used as a restraint or civil use. A restraint or civil use in Israel. In Galatians 2:15, it says, "We ourselves are Jews by birth and not Gentile sinners. Yet we know that a person is not justified by works of the law, but through faith in Christ Jesus. So we also have believed in Christ Jesus in order to be justified by faith in Christ and not by works of the law. Because by works of the law, no one will be justified." You see, as the law of Moses was given to the people of Israel, there was an initial use. It was to govern the personal and communal lives. It was therefore their ceremonial duties and their judicial responsibilities, etc., etc. It is a general reference to the law of Moses in and among the people of Israel. You see, Paul makes it very clear that there is an antithesis or a distance, a difference between pursuing the law for human life and justification by faith. You see, obedience to this original use of the law cannot justify. Only faith in Christ can. This is a rather general reference to the Mosaic law, and it describes its function as a restraint to human sin. Now, the judicial and ceremonial and moral aspects of the law of Moses would all be included in its civil use. The second use of the law. The second use of the law reflects on the purpose of the Mosaic law. And this is found in Galatians 3:19 through 24. It says, "Why then the law? It was added because of transgressions, until the offspring, that is Christ, should come, to whom the promise had been made, and it was put in place through angels by an intermediary." Now, an intermediary implies more than one, but God is one. Is the law then contrary to the promise of God? Certainly not. For if a law had been given that could give life, then righteousness would indeed be by the law. But the scriptures imprisoned everything under sin, so that the promise by faith in Jesus Christ might be given to those who believe. Now, before faith came, we were led captive under the law, imprisoned, until the coming faith would be revealed. So then, the law was our guardian until Christ came, in order that we might be justified by faith. See, Paul shows here how the law was not to just govern the lives of Israel. It was also to be a guardian or a pedagogue. In other words, the law of Moses was to instruct, lead, or guide us toward Christ. I was very fortunate to grow up in a Christian home. I remember my parents used to make up Christian games. It was the Candyland of games. We had a wonderful time. I look forward to playing those games. You know, I wouldn't say that my parents were mega strict, but, you know, at the time, as a kid, you were like, man, my parents are like agents of Satan. They're here to destroy me and, torment me. I lived in a household where if you didn't abide by the rules, just say your backside knew about it. And me and my backside had many talks. But you see, it wasn't until I became a parent myself when I fully understood why rules were given. You see, my wife and I, we implemented a cube system in our house because our sons have been a little bit more rambunctious than before. And so one of the things is that we implement this, but it wasn't just because we said, oh, let's just torment our kids. Let's just go ahead and just make some rules and just get all on them, No, it was for a purpose. The rules had a purpose, a goal. You see, the law of Moses has a purpose. And that purpose is to guide us toward Christ. You see, the word pedagogy has a disciplinary tone as well as some translations say a taskmaster. It functions to convict us, to show us that we are sinners who need salvation. The law was never meant to be permanent. It was never meant to save. It was to direct us towards a certain direction, to Christ, the fulfillment of the law of Moses. The third use of the law is the law of Christ. And this is found in Galatians 6:2. It says, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. And also, let's go to Galatians 5:14 and 15, because this also ties in with it. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you are not consumed by one another. You see, the law is based on grace alone. Grace alone. The law cannot save. There is a clear discontinuity. In other words, with regard to salvation, the law is clearly discontinuous. It leads towards salvation in Christ. But salvation cannot come by the law. It can only come by faith in Christ, by receiving the promise of God. Now, we went over all of that. Now allow me to bring these three usages of the law to a conclusion. Number one, the law, as given to the people of Israel in its civil use, cannot save. The purpose of the law is to lead us as a taskmaster toward the promise of salvation in Christ. And the fulfillment of the law is the consequence of the Christian life, the effects of Christ's work in us. Now, my sophomore year, now, sometimes, my parents hear me preach before, they sometimes hear stuff for the first time, so this may be a first time. So, I'm out of your house right now, so. When I was a sophomore in high school, I skipped class. And, some people, they would skip class and leave school, but I skipped class to go to the weight room, and which was in school. And so I saw one of my boys, he was there, and he was lifting weights, and he was working out his chest, his pecs. And so I go over there, and he convinces me to work out with him. Now, mind you, this dude was like 6'2", 220, and I'm like $130, and half of it was my head. And so, I was kind of intimidated. He started putting 210 pounds on this bar, and I'm sitting here, I'm like, in my mind, dude, I don't know if I can lift that, but I'm going to try. The testosterone starts to kick in too, and then you're like, hold up, people are watching me, okay, let me go ahead and try to get under here and act like I know what I'm doing. So I get down, and lo and behold, I grab the bar, and I push it up. And all of a sudden, I was like, okay, I got this. And I start to bring my arms down, but hold up, something was wrong. My arms started going down faster than what I wanted them to go. And all of a sudden, boom, it hit my chest, and I'm sitting here, and I'm stuck, and I could not push this weight up. And I'm sitting, normally you can just go like this and let the weights fall off, but I couldn't even do that. I was just pinned under these weights. You see, the yoke of the law It's a weight, it's a burden, a yoke of slavery, because it places us under the burden of commandments we cannot keep and under curses that we deserve for our disobedience. So when the Galatians were thinking about getting circumcised, they were really thinking about getting justified. I love how the Bible scholar J.B. Lightfoot puts it. He says, circumcision is the seal of the law. He who willingly and deliberately undergoes circumcision enters upon a compact to fulfill the law. To fulfill it, therefore, he is bound and he cannot plead the grace of Christ, for he has entered on another mode of justification. Let me ask you this afternoon, what is your mode of justification? Could it be the work you do in the church? Could it be the quality or frequency of your personal devotions? Could it be baptism? What is your mode of justification? You see, Paul saw that the Galatians' mode of justification was circumcision. That is why Paul tells them to live free. He says, because we have been freed from the law's deadly curse against our sin, which produced guilt and death. He goes on, he says, stand firm in that freedom. Don't allow these Judaizers to toss you around. You stand firm in the freedom in which Christ has given you. And he told him, he said, look, do not put yourself under a yoke again. You know, it's interesting because when I was doing this sermon, back in the day, we used to walk around, it was around my middle school, we said it a little bit in high school, but we would say the word yoke when somebody got hit. Oh, he got yoked. And I was like, man, what a perfect fitting. Don't get yoked again, Don't put yourself under a yoke. Don't get entangled again into slavery. Don't get bound. In closing, I would like to close with a story and a thought. There was this mulatto girl who was taken from her mother when she was only an infant. She was raised as a slave. For years as a child, all she had to eat was running cornmeal, dumped in a trough that other kids who were slaves fought to scoop out with oyster shells. She was whipped many times with a cowhide whip until blood ran down her back, kicked and beaten by her master until she almost died. The time came one day this mulatto girl was being sold at an auction. As two men bidded for her ownership, the bidding came to a bit of a halt when one of the men outbid the other in a substantial way. See, the gentleman who won the bid was handed the papers, which made him lawful owner now of this mulatto girl. With a shove, the auctioneer presented her to her new master. She was broken, humiliated. She stood before him hopeless. Hopelessness in her eyes, just hurting. She had rage and anger as well. This man, he kindly looked her in her eye, held up the papers, and ripped the papers. He told her, my dear, you are free. You are free. You see, this is what the law does. It crushes us. It beats us. It burdens us. It weighs us down. But Christ, in his sacrificial love,